Okay, great. So I guess Susan can share the screen. We can start.
Sure, but I'm waiting for some people. They are coming. Just maybe. Okay, I'll start. Because
Yeah,
they asked for
I guess share the screen first.
Okay. So can you see the slides?
Yeah.
Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Susan. I am applied mathematician at the University of Manitoba and a member of HQP organizing committee. Welcome to OMNI-Seminar series. Today we are excited to officially launch One Health Modeling Network for Emerging Infection OMNI Super Separate Seminar series, led by Professor Zhou in the Department of Mathematics at York University. The OMNI-Seminars actually is a platform for highly qualified personnel, especially postdocs and graduate students, to present their research experiences and extend their networks among other researchers. These bi-weekly actually seminars are an opportunity for knowledge transfer between different scientific community. I guess I have to change the slide, trying just to Professor. Sorry, I need to stop sharing again. So to introduce Professor Zhou, just yeah, transfer to Professor Zhou. Professor Zhou is a professor of mathematics at the Department of Math and at York University. He is the research chair in applied mathematics, the director of Laboratory of Mathematical Parallel Systems at York University, the director of the Canadian Center for Disease Modeling, and the director of One Health Modeling Network for Emerging Infections. Professor Zhou, please proceed, and we are excited to hear your opening remarks about these seminars.
Thank you, Susan. Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, absolutely.
Good morning, everybody. I see also there's some audience from China. Good evening. Thanks, Susan, for the introduction. On behalf of the co-directors of the OMNI-RÉUNIS, Professor Elaine Carbin and Professor Mark Lewis. So here I welcome all of you to join this event. First, I'd like to thank Professor Jacques Blech, in fact, who is now in Germany, participated in the European Society of Mathematical Biology conference. Also, Professor Arnie Rocker. He does not feel well this morning, unfortunately. I should thank them, the two, for their leadership in organizing the knowledge transfer activities and event for the network. In particular, I would especially thank our HQP organizers, the organizing committee, to organize this special super spreader seminar series. So they are Dr. Joseph Barfey from Memorial University of Newfoundland and Labrador, Dr. Susan Farhan Sarudi from University of Manitoba, Dr. Shivdeep Singer Air from University of Guelph, also Dr. Jeda Mola and Pei Yuan from York University. I also want to thank the support of our program manager, Natasha Keter, also our IT support, Stephen Chen from York University. Thank you. So in fact, this series is organized by and will be for our postdocs and graduate students. So I will make it short. So I hope all our postdocs and graduate students enjoy the event and perform in the event. Also, would like to everybody to become super spreaders as next generation of One Health disease modeler. So I wish the series will be a great success. Thank you. Back to you, Susan.
Thank you so much, Professor Zhou. Let's so I share my screen again to introduce our first speaker. So our first speaker today is Dr. Pei Yuan from York University. Dr. Yuan is a postdoctoral researcher in the Department of Mathematics and Statistics, Canadian Center for Disease Modeling, and One Health Modeling Network for Emerging Infection, OMNI. Dr. Yuan obtained her PhD in applied mathematics from York University in 2021. She works in a broad field of application, including modeling and control of infectious disease, TPS control, climate change, mosquito-borne disease, data-driven statistical modeling and analysis. Today, she's going to talk about modeling risk assessment and control of the emerges monkeypox transmission. So Dr. Yuan, please proceed and share your slide.
Thank you. So I will share my screen now. So can you see?
Yes, we can see. Thank you.
Oh, what happened? Yeah. It's full screen now?
Yes, that is perfect. Proceed, please.
Okay, thank you. So first, thanks to them for the introduction. And also I want to thank the OMNI for giving me this opportunity to present our recent work. So today I'm gonna to talk about for the modeling, risk assessment, and control of the emerging monkeypox transmission. So first of all, I want to thank our collaborators and for their contribution and efforts. So the Professor Huaiping Zhu, the Elena, Yi Tan, and Liu Yang from our labs group, and Dr. Nick Ogden from PHAC, and for the CCDM network, Professor Jack Blair from University of Montreal, Professor Jen Huffman from York University, Professor Junior Areno from University of Manitoba, and Professor James Watman from University of New Brunswick, and Professor Ellen Carabin from University of Montreal. So I will introduce some background about monkeypox and then goes to two different modeling work. One is about the assessing the transmission risk of the monkeypox in a metropolitan area. And another one is about the vaccination, the control strategy of monkeypox outbreak at gatherings. So we know that the monkeypox cases keep increasing in the non-endemic countries and the areas in the last few months. So this year, as of the 5th September 2022, there are more than 52,000 confirmed cases, and now the total cases is more than 60,000. And 18 deaths have been reported to the WHO from 102 countries in 6 WHO regions, and which leading to the WHO declaring the monkeypox as a public health emergency of international concern on July 23. So from the following days figure and the table, we can observe that the most affected area is the regions of Americas, so colored by this light blue, and with like more than 29,000 of cases, and followed by the European region for the red color in the bar chart. So with like more than 22,000 of cases. And for the deaths, the African region reported the most deaths, which is 10. And for the situation in Canada, the monkeypox keep increasing starting from the May, and the total count for the confirmed cases of monkeypox in Canada was like 1,363 as September 16, and the most affected province in Canada are Ontario and Quebec, and also for the Toronto and Montreal are these two most affected cities in the Canada. Okay, now we want to talk about something about the monkeypox. So the monkeypox is a double-strand DNA virus. So compared to the RNA virus, it is like has much less chance to the mutation. So on the right-hand side for this picture shows the monkeypox virus, which is very closely related to the smallpox virus. So, and for the animal reservoir remains unknown, but there's a lot of animal hosts, like for the rodents and non-human primates. So there are two clades for the monkeypox virus. One is the Central African clade, and another one is West African clade. So the former one has a much higher mortality rate, which is around 10%. And the case fatality rate for the West Africa clade is around 3.6%. And for the current circulating monkeypox virus is originated from the West African clade. And for the recent study, it's showing that there has some like genetic change, and it has a much higher than expected rate of the genomic variance. So the first cases were discovered in the monkeys in 1958, and the first human cases was reported in the Democratic Republic of Congo in 1917. So between the 1980 to the 2000, the monkeypox cases is confined to the African continent. So there has been no reported in the other parts of the world in this period. And after 2000 to the 2020, in this time period, the monkeypox virus widely spread within the African continent. So like for the DRC reported the most cases is more than 20,000. And during this period, for other countries had some like for very little cases are reported, like in US, Israel, UK, and Singapore. So the first report outside for the Africa is in the United States, which is comes from the imported Gambian poached rats in 2003. And but in this year, 2020, after May, there is the cases of the monkeypox increased dramatically, including in the area like Europe, US, Canada, Australia, a lot of, like we have mentioned that 106 countries and areas. So for the incubation period of this monkeypox is around like 5 to 21 days. So in this period, there's no symptoms. And then it will go to like for the prodromal stage. So they may have some flu-like symptoms like fever, chills, like headache, muscle pain. And this stage will last for 1 to 5 days. Then they will develop some rash on the skin. So for the rash stage will last for 14 to 21 days, which is around 2 weeks to 3 weeks. And then they will recover in 2 to 4 weeks. And when they recover, there's no symptoms. But in the recent outbreak, we observed the atypical clinical observations. So for the patients, most are who are men have sex with men, which is we call it MSM. So they reported for the genital lesions and then subsequently spread to the other side in the body, and which is more limited in the distribution than the reported in the previous outbreak. So this is a new symptoms in this current outbreak. So for the transmissions can occur among the animal population and the human population. So for the animal to animal transmission may be due to the close contact with the infected animals or animal tissues, and a range of the animal species are considered to can transmit the virus to the humans. So like through direct contact, bite, scratch, or eating some uncooked cooked meat. So those are the factors like of the transmission in Africa in the previous outbreak. And most important, the human-to-human transmission may result from the bodily fluid and such as saliva from the coughing and the direct physical contact, and including the sexual contact, which is the primary reason. And there are also some studies indicate that there's kind of transmission from mothers to the fetus during the close contact during and after the birth, but it's very limited evidence. And we also want to mention that there can be like from the environment get the virus, like for the indirect contact with the lesion materials, like from the contaminated for clothing or bedding, some things like that. Also, the monkeypox can be transmitted by the airborne droplet among the human population, but with less possibilities compared to the COVID. But it can transmit it by the airborne droplet. So now we go to our first model assessing the transmission risk in the metropolitan area. So for the current outbreak, so based on the data from Italy, Portugal, Australia, and the UK, so all the patients were males, and over 95% of them are MSM, and around 44% patients are in their 30s. And more than half of them are HIV positive, and over 90% of the cases reported for the sexual exposure. So, and we also like we mentioned before, for the current circulating virus has some genetic variants, like for the genetic change or evolutions. So it shows a higher than expected rate of genomic variance among the outbreak sequences. So it suggests that there will be accelerates the evolution of this monkeypox virus. And these changes may be responsible for the current outbreak. But there's still a lot remains unknown and unclear for the current monkeypox virus. But from the history data, we can observe for the significant shift in the epidemiological trend of the monkeypox, like for the median affected age in the 1970 to 1989, it is around 4 to 5 years old. And then it becomes to the 10 years old, 20 years old. And in this year, the median age of the affected individuals is among like 38 years old. This is based on the data from the UK cases. So there are some concerns about like for the current monkeypox transmissions. So the first day is like the scientists are concerned about like for the human monkeypox outbreak will establish the virus in animal outside Africa. And also the second one, we mentioned that before, the majority of cases reported in the MSM communities. And also the last one is like for the human transmission could cause the virus to spill back to the animals. So it may like leading to the increased risk of transmission in both human and animals. Based on those effects, that's why we do the risk assessment of this monkeypox virus in Canada to want to support for the decision makings. So we know that the monkeypox is a zoonosis disease, and then we need to like apply for our One Health modeling framework. So I guess all our members in the OMNI network are considering using this framework. In this project, so we want to assess the risk of the monkeypox transmission by considering the monkeypox virus has suddenly increased its human-to-human transmission efficiency. That's why we see this large outbreak across the world. And it has become much more efficiently transmitted as a sexual transmitted disease. So our objective is like we want to assess for the transmission risk and then to look at what kind of public health measures can help to control or mitigate for the current outbreak. So goes to our model part. So based on the European CDC report, we classify the human population into two groups: the low risk group, labeled as LRG, with like for the broad populations, and for the higher risk population group for the HRG. So it is including for the MSM and for the health professionals, some people with a higher risk for exposure to the virus. So here we present our model flowchart. So we employ the SEIR model in the both human population with the subscription H and the animal population with subscription R. And they both have the susceptible, exposed, infectious, and recover compartment. And then, but in the human population, we include other compartments, like including for the infectious and in the prodromal phases, we use the capital P. And we also include for the quarantine Q and for the quarantine successful individuals, QS. So in our assumption, the virus can transmit among the low risk group and the high risk group and between them. And we also assume that animal can only transmit the virus into the high risk group people for simplicity. So also in our model, we're considering for the contact tracing for the symptomatic infections. But we know that for the contact tracing for those one is very difficult because people don't want to talk about their sexual activities. So actually this part is very difficult. So I will not like talk more details about our model. So if you're interested, so here you can see, you can find more details in our this paper. So this is our model equations. I will not explain more details here. So now let's see some interesting simulation results of our model. So in the following scenarios that I present, we both assume that the proportion of the individuals in the high-risk group people among the total population is around 3.5%. And in this scenario, we assume that the basic reproduction number of the monkeypox virus is around 1.2 to 1.5. And the initial case is human infections. So here, the blue line and the orange line shows the median of the daily new cases of the low-risk group and high-risk group, respectively. And if there's no public health control measures, we can see that the peak of the daily new infections, the monkeypox one may reach to the 5,000 for a metropolitan area with a population of 5 million. But if we isolate 65% of the infection with the rash symptoms, then it can keep at a very low level of the prevalence. So remember here, we didn't introduce for the contact tracing. It's only just isolating for the people who with rash symptoms. This is the case like for the R0 is quite low, like range 1.2 to 1.5. But what if the transmission efficiency is increased? Like we are concerned for the virus evolution. So here we introduce another scenario, which when the transmission efficiency is increased by 50% in the high-risk group people. So now makes our reproduction number is increased to the 1.8 to 2.25. So here we can see that if only with like 65% of rash motivated isolation strategy, it will be not enough. So, but if we combine with 60% of contact tracing in the high-risk group people, the case will drop in both high-risk group and low-risk group of people. But we still can see it will not like eradicate for the virus. Here, we introduce another one, like when the initial cases is animal infections, which means we include for the animal transmissions and human transmissions in the model. And this is also conducting the assumption like for increased transmission efficiency by 50% in the high-risk group people. So we will observe like for the multiple outbreaks, which is driven by the seasonality of the animal populations. So and we will observe a much higher number of the peak size in both low risk and high risk group people. So in this case, which means like we need to monitoring and control the infections in the animal populations if there is some infections among animals. So now, in summary, the monkeypox may spill over from the high-risk group to the broader population if the efficiency of transmission increased in the high-risk group people. But those kind of risks can be greatly reduced if at least 65% of symptomatic cases can be isolated, and also their contacts can be traced and quarantined. But we know this is very difficult to do that for contact tracing. And then we observe that for the infection in animals will increase the monkeypox virus transmission risk in the human populations. So we may need to monitoring for the animal infections. And also we found that for the reasons or communities with higher proportion of the MSM may need for greater public health attention. So now for this one, the first model, we didn't consider for the vaccination strategy. So we know that for the smallpox, it's eradicated due to the mass vaccination campaign. So we are curious about what if we introduce the vaccination strategy in our model. And here we will introduce the vaccination strategy in the high-risk group people. So now let's go to our second model. First, we want to talk about something about the monkeypox vaccine. So there are two approved by the FDA. One is the second generation of the smallpox vaccine, which is called ACAM 2000. So this one is one dose vaccine, and the immune response takes 4 weeks for the maximum development. And another one is the Genius and we may call it by the brand name. In Canada, we call it Imvamune or Imvamune. It is the third generation of the smallpox vaccine, and the immune response takes 2 weeks after second doses for the maximum development. And for this approved for the monkeypox is coming from for the studies conducted in the non-human primates. So now we want to introduce something about the monkeypox vaccination program in Canada. So on June 10, 2020, the National Advisory Committee on Immunization, NACI, has issued the interim guidance on the use of the Imvamune for the monkeypox outbreak in Canada. So, any question?
No, I guess, so the audience, would you please, yeah, just mute if you don't have any questions, sorry.
Thank you. So the vaccine is recommended for the Canadians at high risk of exposure, and it is offered to the adults 18 years of age and older, and a second doses may be recommended after 20 days for the first doses. So for this, Imvamune is non-replicating vaccine, which means it does not contain the smallpox virus, and it cannot spread or cause the smallpox. So for the NACI, they recommended use for the vaccine Imvamune in the post-exposure and the pre-exposure protection. So for the PEP, they recommended in the adults for 1 single doses, and for the individuals with high risk exposure to the probable or confirmed cases of monkeypox. And for the vaccine, we offer as soon as possible within 4 to 14 days of their last exposure. So, and for this one PEP, in the PEP, they should not offer the individuals who are symptomatic cases. And in the PREP, they are used for the adult at high risk of occupational exposure. So they will be offered for 2 doses, but given at least 28 days apart. And they may give booster doses if after 2 years, if they still consider as high risk exposure to the monkeypox virus. So for the effectiveness of the Imvamune, then currently there is no data indicating for the efficacy or effectiveness for this vaccination against the monkeypox infection. So either in both for the PREP or the PEP. So we just can like have some information from the vaccination against from the smallpox, so have some estimation. So for the vaccination against smallpox was found that through some observational studies to be about like it can be 85 effective in preventing the monkeypox. And through the smallpox vaccination, we know that like in the context of the PEP, the median effectiveness in the preventing the smallpox disease with vaccination at 1 to 3 days after exposure was estimated as 80%. And for the immune response can be detected by the week 2 after first doses, and peaked at week 6 after dose 2. And also there is one study showing that for the immune response after 1 or 2 doses of the Imvamune declined after 2 years, which means they indicate some waning immunity of this monkeypox vaccine, Imvamune. And for the monkeypox vaccine capacity in Canada, the Quebec has 40,000 doses of the vaccine, and Montreal expects 25,000 doses, and will cover the target population in the city. And also in this May, the PHAC placed the order for 500,000 for the doses for the smallpox vaccine, but these doses won't be delivered until April 2023. So now I think it just can be like given offer to the people who with high risk exposure to the virus. For the testing of this monkeypox, which means resulting for the confirmation of these monkeypox cases, in Canada, it is the National Microbiology Lab to perform the testing for the virus. But in BC, CBC, they can also do by a PCR test. And their turnaround time is around like 36 hours. But in Ontario, they cannot do the testing. So the people, they can just send the sample to the National Microbiology Lab. And then the turnaround time is around 2 calendar days. So in Ottawa, if you have done the test for the monkeypox, so you should like self-isolate at home until you receive the negative test result. So if you are tested, no matter you have received the result or not, you have to self-isolate yourself at home. And if you test positive for monkeypox, then you need to self-isolate at home until the lesion scab have fallen off. And this repeat may take 2 to 4 weeks. So for isolation, but this time is quite long, I don't think. So for the compliance for the people would be like doubted. It will be quite low. So another concern about that is for the mass gathering event. So after more than 2 years of COVID pandemic, so people are eager to take some break or go to some festival or gathering event. So in many Canadian provinces, the local festival attendance is close to the pre-pandemic level. And in the United States, there's many cases were reported linked to the large social gatherings. And the WHO also expressed that the more infections could arise in Europe or elsewhere due to those kind of social gathering events. And for there's some modern study also verify those kind of like mass gathering events are associated with the increased transmission risk of the infectious disease, such as COVID-19. So like for there is a mass gathering event with 200,000 participants. So there is a 23.6% increase of positive cases. And also there's another study showing that the second wave of the COVID-19 in the Malaysia is largely attributed to a 4 days mass gathering held in the Seri Petaling. And also the recent one, the study showing that the effect of the increased density of the contact during the Hajj was estimated to generate a 78-fold increase in the disease transmission. So this will not only affect for the pilgrims, but also for the local populations, which means the mass gathering rates can cause large or potential outbreaks. That's our concern. And there is a preprint. Also, they are modeling they want to estimate the mass gathering event effect. So they estimate that although the role of the group contact in the mass gathering is uncertain, but the close contact associated with the event may be the amplifying the event, which means that those close contact, it is the close contact in the gathering caused the problem. This is also mentioned in the WHO reported about for the guideline for the monkeypox prevention during the gathering. So now for our objective, we want to examine the vaccination rolling out strategy in controlling the outbreak of monkeypox if there is a mass gathering in the high-risk population. So we want to know what kind of public health measures needed to control or mitigate it at this case. And we want to estimate the proportion of vaccinated individuals needed to control the monkeypox transmissions. And we want to give some insight on public health guideline for safe gathering. So here we present our flowchart. So followed by our part 1 model, here we ignore for the transmission in the animal population, and we considering there is a mass gathering event and the vaccination campaign in the high-risk group people. So here we also include a new compartment of the quarantine and the vaccinated individuals, because here we assume that if people they are vaccinated, they are asked to be quarantined. And so this is a very important assumption in this model. And also because of people born before 1972 have been vaccinated with the smallpox vaccine. So in our model at the initial stage, there is a proportion of the low-risk group people and high-risk group people, they is considered as fully vaccinated for simplicity. So also for the details of our model, you can find in this preprint. And now we just want to show some interesting results. So here we project the daily new infections in the low risk group and the high risk group. When the mass gathering event occurs between July 20 to August 1st, 2022, so which is here represented by this gray shade line. And if the public health control measures are not in place, we would observe a large outbreak and followed by the mass gathering event. And this will be increased with the number of the attendees and also for the transmissibility. Because here we have different scenarios. There, the first two are when the R0 is equal to 1.5. The last one is for R0 equal to 3. And for the first one, we only have 10,000 attendees daily. And for the last two, we have 100,000 attendees daily. So we observe that the larger size of the attendees, the earlier of the peak and the higher of the peak size. So from this figure, we can observe that the peak size of the monkeypox outbreak is significantly associated with the number of the effective contact and gathering, which is aligned with that we mentioned for the preprint and also in the WHO report. And so if there is no, for this scenario, so there's no restrictions on the gathering activities, which means we didn't require for the vaccination requirement for that. And so here we also assume that the testing and isolation of the symptomatic infections are in place. So given those kind of assumption, then we have a very seems very strange conclusion. It is like for the PEP strategy, like we vaccinate for the people with exposures is more beneficial to the control of the monkeypox outbreak compared to the PREP strategy, which means we vaccinated for the people in the high risk group people, like for vaccinating for the MSM communities. So we got those kind of results, which can be expected because we know that it needs time to develop an immune response. And another very important reason is like we only vaccinate for the high risk group people, but for those kind of people only account for like 3.5%. So like for people born before 1972, it accounts for 38. And now we just only add on for the, if it is 100% vaccinated in the high risk group people, it only add up for the 3.5%, which means we still have a very low vaccination coverage in the general population. So that's why we would observe for the PEP is much beneficial, because here we ask for those people with exposure and they vaccinated, they need to isolate themselves so they can cut off the transmission route, which means it will result for much more significant case decrease. So this figure shows a control plot of the peak infection in the low risk group people and high risk people under the assumption there's no intervention on the attendees. So for this one, there is like 100,000 daily attendees and the reproduction number is around 3. So we found that the public health intervention on constraint for the effect contact in the gathering benefits more from containing the transmissions compared to the vaccination coverage in the high-risk group people before the gathering event start. So you can see that it's basically determined by the effect contact in the gatherings. So if we restrain the effect contact below like 20, we can see we can keep the monkeypox, like we can mitigate or control it for the monkeypox gathering when there is a gathering. So we also conduct for other scenarios, like what if we constrain for the attendees with vaccine requirement, but we didn't present those kind of results here. And then we just want to sum up. Our second model shows that the risk of the monkeypox outbreak remains high if there is mass gathering event and if there is no public health control measures. But the outbreak can be well controlled by cut off the transmission by isolate the confirmed cases and inoculating their close contact. We also call this by the ring vaccination strategy, which is we call it PEP strategy here. So we also observe that the PEP is more effective for the containment in this summer gathering and then a broad vaccination campaign in the high-risk group people. And we also found that gathering event can be made safe with some restrictions of either the number and the density of the attendees in the gathering or the vaccination requirement. So if you ask people the attendees with vaccination requirement, then we can also allow a safe gathering. And lastly, we want to mention some mathematical analysis, as we are mathematicians, but there are some challenges. So it involves several populations like high-risk group people, low-risk group people, animal population. So we may want to treat it as multiple scale dynamic systems, and then considering using the geometric singular perturbation theory to study its dynamics. And also we want to know the reproduction number in each subpopulation and to investigate the role of each population in the transmission of the monkeypox. Anyway, we will leave it for our further studies. So that's all. Thank you for your attention. Any question?
Dr. Yuan, thank you so much. It was very interesting presentation. Does anyone has any question?
Can I?
Sure. Sure.
Yeah,
go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. A very great talk. Interesting, and I really appreciate how you organized everything, and it's interesting the work. So, yeah, I am Asaf, and I want to ask two simple questions. Probably, maybe they are very not well known currently, but the first question is that in terms of, I read some documentation which mentions about the impact of smallpox vaccination. Those people who has been vaccinated maybe 30, 40 years ago may have somehow protection against monkeypox. I don't know if that is the case, if you have any evidence about that. And if those people who are currently maybe 70 years old, 60 years old, have some sort of protection because of smallpox vaccination, is that something we can consider to the monkeypox modeling considering vaccination? This is my first question. And the second one is in relation to the last slides, you were considering about mass gathering, and you were trying to even see the contour plot where you consider the effect of contacts versus vaccination coverage. And like, yes, here, for example, even the next slide. Anyways, so when we consider mass gathering and or effect of contacts, this one, are we talking about the sexual contacts or just direct contacts? Because at this time, monkeypox is somehow, even it is considered as STI, if I am not mistaken. So what do you mean by those effective contacts or mass gatherings? So, because even though there are still a little percentage where there may be transmission due to direct contact like food or something else, but more than 95% of the transmission is by sexual contacts. So what do you mean by mass gathering in this case? Do you mean mass sexual contact, or I just want to clarify? Thank you.
Thank you so much. So firstly, I want to thank you for your appreciation. And then these two questions, very good questions. So I will answer for the first one. So can you see this one? So here in our modeling part, you can see there is a V1 and V2 over bar, the V1 under bar. For these two, we consider for the people who are fully vaccinated because they already vaccinated by the smallpox vaccine. So I mentioned that in Canada, for the people born before 1972, they all vaccinated by the smallpox vaccine. So, which means for those kind of population, actually it accounts for 38% of the whole population. It's quite a lot. Oh. And we consider they have some protections for the monkeypox infection. So that's how we model this part in our second modeling part.
Sorry for interruption. Yes, there is some protection, but is there any data which tells us how effective is that, or how much they get protection against monkeypox? Is there any data in case you have? It's good to know.
Yeah, that's a very good question because like people, there's no uncertainty. There's a lot of uncertainty about how this smallpox vaccine can protect for the monkeypox infection. Even though for the Imvamune, for this new vaccination, they don't know this new vaccine. They don't know like how much is the effectiveness. There's no current like available study for that. They only for this approval for this vaccination is because of some study conducted in the animal.
Okay.
So it is a hard question. So we don't know. So we just can like assume this is for the simplest, for the assumption for that. So we assume it's like 80% or 85%. It's a range. We assume a range for those, like those one and those two, because there's quite like a lot of uncertainty about for this effectiveness for the vaccine. So in our model, we assume it is a range around like 60% to 80%.
Okay, thank you.
If you're asking for this one. So,
okay.
But we don't know because there's a lot of uncertainty about this one for the effectiveness of the vaccine. So for the second one, I guess, yeah, that's a really good question, I would say. So in here, because we are not saying like it just can transmit the virus through the sexual contact. For the direct contact, it also can transmit the virus. That's why we didn't like only constrain it to a sexual transmitted disease, because directed or undirected, like even people can obtain the virus from the environment. So here, the contact is not constrained to the, like for the sexual contact, because if you're saying like people have like 30, 50 sexual contact, I don't think so in the gathering. But for those kind of gathering, so the most important is for the close contact, like how many effective contact. People only like with some close friends for some those kind of party. So we are just saying it is physical contact, so not for sexual contact. Yeah, I guess that's for these two questions. I'm not sure if you're, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, any other question? Okay, so I guess I do have some questions, but I will contact by email with you because we are running out of time. So then thank you so much. Yes, Dr. Yuan. So I'm gonna share my screen about the last slide that we have. So then and thank you everyone for joining us. Our next speaker will be posted by email, and please follow up our Twitter channels actually. So let's just, yeah, these are our Twitter channels on Omni groups and mine, and we will post our actually posters. So then, and we will keep you posted by email. Thank you.
Thank you.